We have somebody from Seattle. And lots of Massachusetts. Massachusetts? All right, I guess while you guys are sharing who you are and where you're from, I will also do the same. So my name is Laura Stricker. I'm the museum researcher at Providence Children's Museum in Providence, Rhode Island. I also work across sites at Brown University in a developmental lab, but today I have my museum hat on, and we are going to be talking about how hands-on learning has been affected by COVID. And this is a little bit of what we're diving into today. So we're gonna share some reopening data from children's museums across the country. And then we will be moving into talking about creating a safe space for our visitors, a new safe space, kind of rethinking what a safe space is, how we have seen our visitors and our experience change before and after COVID, and then our virtualization of exhibits and programs. So I think what I will do now is I'm going to be monitoring the chat and the questions, and so I will keep an eye out as they come in. Our hope is to get some quality time at the end to start a discussion and answer all of your questions. I know we already have a few. So what I will do now is turn it over to our panelists, and they will introduce themselves and tell you where they are from.
Thank you, Laura. So my name is Jennifer Rehkamp. I'm the Director of Field Services at the Association of Children's Museums. And so we have been collecting data about children's museums, the impact of COVID on them since May. So I'm going to be kind of teeing up each of the discussion points to kind of contextualize it. And then we can move it forward. Welcome, nice to see everyone.
Hi, I'm Melissa Higgins. I'm the Senior Director of STEAM at Boston Children's Museum in Boston, Massachusetts. I was gonna say, I think we're massholes, Laura. Can I say that on a recorded Zoom when you said Massachusetts?
I mean, you are the expert.
And I'm really excited to share a little bit of what we've been learning and hear from you all about what you've been learning about hands-on during this strange time. And we're sharing across different points, but particularly I'm hoping to bring a bit of the program lens to our conversation.
Hi, y'all. My name is Maureen Bishop. I'm the Visitor Experience Manager at Providence Children's Museum. We just opened October 1st, so still a little fresh for us. We've been about 6 weeks, and I'm excited to share from the frontline staffing perspective and just being kind of on the ground, on the floor each day that we've been open.
Okay, so in talking about creating a new safe space, I wanted to just give a couple of slides of data to just contextualize this, as I said. So ACM has been monitoring the reopening status, both of our entire membership, which is global, and as well as different regions. So the pie chart on the left, just really quickly, is showing you where we are as of last week. We are looking at 59% of our museums have reopened in some capacity. 36%, that's that green pie slice, have remained closed since the pandemic. Those are museums that have not attempted to reopen at all. And 5% of museums have reclosed, meaning they attempted to reopen at some point, they've reclosed. Some of those reclosures are temporary, some are extended as the closed are. Staying on the pie charts and moving over, I'm also breaking that out for the New England region. The New England region consists of 28 museums, whereas our global museums we're serving are 322, just to give you some context. As you can see, the New England region is a little different, not too much, but you have a reopen percentage of 55%, 41% of museums have remained closed since the pandemic, and 4% have reclosed. I'm also giving you some bar graphs showing the museums that have reopened per month starting in May. That's the first month we saw reopening in the Children's Museum field. So you can see it was just under 10 opening in May. June and July were our highest reopening months globally, where we saw upwards of 50 in June and almost 60 in July. August, September, and October, we did see consistent reopenings. And of course, we haven't finished November yet. Going over to New England, you can see the New England area, rather, you can see that's the reopening is a little different. There was reopening that started in June. There were quite a few in July, so probably like 7, I would say. And then it seems pretty consistent in August, September, and October as well. So again, just to give you some context on that. Okay, next slide, please. In addition to surveying the field, we've also conducted 2 COVID impact surveys. The first one I'm going to talk about actually is the most recent one we did, which was completed at the end of September, early October. And you can see there is a link to the results from that survey that we've disseminated. It's a hyperlink, so if these slides are available to you, you can access that there. We asked a question on how museums were providing safety protocols to their visitors. And these are some of the responses in this first chart at the top, where 87% of museums were offering personal protection equipment of some kind, or requiring visitors to use some form of personal protection equipment when visiting their museums, which included face covering, masks, gloves, face shields, etc. 72% of museums were also requiring sanitation, some form of sanitation options. So whether that was stations that they had built or created at their entries and exits, hand sanitizers throughout their museums, disinfectant wipes, and even floor mats. And then 63% of museums were requiring some sort of health check. What that meant, which could mean temperature checks, screening procedures, so filling out like a flyer to identify if they've had any symptoms. Some museums were also requiring waivers. The other thing I wanted to just mention briefly is, as we were seeing museums open globally on those first in June and July, many children's museums were realizing that they didn't necessarily fit into the phased opening guidelines that their states were offering. This led several children's museums to have to advocate for their reopening to their state or local governments. And these are some hyperlinks to the resources that they created. So on the far right, or the second to the right, I have the Discovery Children's Museum. There's a hyperlink to their reopening plan, which is quite extensive. They had medical experts that helped them create this plan. They identified not only how they would be accepting people back, how they would be admitting people back into their museum. They also talked about their safety procedures in terms of cleaning, frequency, what they're using, which aspects of their museum exhibits would be open and closed and why. So it's incredibly detailed. I mention it because they got approval from their state, and it was actually recognized as one of the best reopening plans in their state, and they're in Las Vegas, Nevada. So we've been sharing this with a lot of our members, and again, there's a hyperlink there for you all to view when you can. The Magic House also took the same route, but in addition, their president of their museum created a video to describe the procedures and protocols that visitors would expect by walking through the museum. So this was also an effort to maintain that respected relationship with their visitors when they decided to reopen. And so both of these museums were in those earlier phases of reopening for children's museums. I also mentioned both Boston and Providence, who have examples of what to expect on their websites, and that are also incredibly detailed, highlighting many of the things as in the Discovery Children's Museum's report on what to expect, their cleaning procedures, what's open and what's not, and their admission process. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Awesome, thanks, Jennifer. So for, as we get into, Melissa and I talking about our museums, what I'm going to focus on for creating a new safe space is our check-in process, our signage, and our loose parts cleaning. So as Jennifer said from some of that data, we are definitely one of those museums requiring face coverings. We are also doing waivers online when visitors purchase their tickets. But for now, I want to focus on what we're having our friends do when they get to our door. So when they're getting tickets online in advance so that we know how many people we're expecting that day, and we can always monitor the capacity of our building. We have 50 tickets available per time slot. So they'll come up to our door. We will have someone at the door greeting them, welcoming them. For a lot of them, we're asking them if they've been since we've reopened, and we're just communicating how happy we are to see them. And then, of course, we do have to talk a little bit about the rules and what has changed, always keeping it in that positive light, of course. So we check that all of our friends are wearing their masks, and then we explain this check-in process. So we're having everyone complete a temperature check. That's what you see in the middle picture there. It's a thermal temperature scanner. So you walk right up to it, you kind of put your face in the outline, and it reads your temperature. People are still kind of getting used to how to use that. It's obviously not something we're used to seeing, but with some, we have people that are already coming back and they know the drill and they just walk right up to it and then keep going. After their temperature check, we go to the station. So picture you see on your left, that's where we have someone sitting behind plexi. We have them review the screening questionnaire that was actually created by Reopening Rhode Island. It talks about symptoms and exposure. We have one in English and Spanish, and we ask our visitors to review and just verify that all the answers to those questions are no. And then to the right of that, we do have a whiteboard that talks about all of the states that are on our current travel restrictions list. And we ask if they have visited there in the past 2 weeks. We have only had 2 times where someone has answered yes. If that is the case, we ask if they have spent the time quarantining or if they have that negative test result. So again, we haven't had a lot of yeses to those. Most people are saying they haven't gone anywhere, but that's a great step that we have as well. Finally, they go to scan their tickets. We answer any other general questions they have, and we send them off to play. And for the most part, this process, what's really wonderful about this is we're conducting it in our old lunchroom, and we're able to keep our visitors distance as they go through this process. And so there's really no, there's also a lot less people coming. So there's no traffic jam, and everyone's at a safe distance, and they head on into play. Next, I want to focus on what we're doing for our signage. We really thought a lot about our signage. We wanted to make sure we weren't bombarding our visitors with, there's already so much to look at in the museum, and we know that our grown-ups are the ones that are reading the signs. And so we wanted to also include some graphics that would help the children, understand what has changed for us. So on the left, that's our sandwich board that is outside of the museum. It lets anyone know that comes up to our patio that we do have to have a ticket purchased, we do have to wear a mask, and then we will do a health screening. And we have those visuals for that process as well. In the middle, you see our occupancy signs. Those are really some of the most prominent new signs. Again, we've tried to keep it minimal. That lets all of our friends know how many people we can have in each space. All of our floor staff are using that as a guideline as well, letting someone know if we can go play in a new exhibit and check when this one is less, crowded is not the word, but less people in it. And we're using both number of people and also the number of groups as guidelines. So we know sometimes we have bigger pods of people coming in, so our floor staff are using those. And then finally on the right, we have our sidewalk decals that are outside. We encourage people to distance as they're waiting in line. And then finally, for my section, for creating a new safe space, I want to talk about our loose parts cleaning. So this is obviously one of the biggest challenges that we had to work through together. It was an extremely cross-departmental effort. As a children's museum, and Melissa I know is nodding her head as well, we have so many things you can pick up and touch and move around. These are quite literally a small sampling of all the things in the museum you can pick up. So we have a very talented housekeeping team that work extensively on a plan for how each item, what's the most appropriate way for them to be cleaned. They ended up removing most of our porous items. So our costumes for now are removed. Our stuffed, like puppet stuffed animals from an exhibit are removed. And what we have left are the things we can easily clean. And because we have 2 time slots at the museum, we are able to have fresh sets of loose parts for each playtime, which is really exciting. So our friends coming in the afternoon have a totally new set of items to play with. So after our morning time slot, we're closed for 30 minutes and before the new people come in. We take away all the used loose parts, and then we set out all the new ones. And in the meantime, our housekeeping team is cleaning all of those morning loose parts, and those become the loose parts that we put out for the next morning. So it's just a constant rotation of those items. What you see on the left there is our maker, just a small counter in our maker space that we've turned into our staging area for this cleaning. We're not using it right now, and it's become a great space so that we can get all that done. And on the right, you see some of our giant bins that are loaded up and ready to roll out for the next time slot. Well, one other thing I will mention for cleaning for us is that all of our floor staff have a bottle of disinfectant spray that they're carrying around, as well as our 2 full-time housekeepers, so that not only are we doing this switch between time slots, but we are cleaning frequently touched surfaces all throughout the day, and our visitors are seeing that, so they know that we're doing it. So I know there's lots to talk about here, but I'll stop and hand it over to Melissa.
Thanks, Maureen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the processes that we've put in place for making sure the programs that we're running in the museum are as safe as possible. Boston Children's Museum, fitting with what Jennifer shared about museums in New England, we opened mid-July. So we've had a few months under our belt of running programs. We did hold off for the first, I think it was 2.5 weeks. We had the museum open just with exhibits and not running any specific programs because we really wanted to make sure that the processes and procedures we had in place as a baseline were working before we jumped in with any programs. And we were able to use a lot of the same, and in fact, it was a goal to use a lot of the same processes and procedures whenever possible for programs, both for keeping consistent messaging for our visitors, and also so we're not driving our staff completely insane with different safety protocols in different areas. But this was a new process for us. So we're a relatively large children's museum, and it's not necessarily common that people from different education teams would know what the programs were. That, like, I'm on the STEAM team. I might know what the culture and performing arts team was planning on a given day, but I might not. So bringing together groups, individuals from all of our education teams into one program proposal process was a new idea for us. And that's basically what we decided would be the most effective way to go about this. So we created a pretty short proposal sheet that's focused on the 4 circles that you see here. So we're thinking about what's the role of the staff in whatever the program is going to be. How are we going to help ensure physical distancing? Are there any hygiene protocols that are new or different, or are we just using some of the same processes that the museum already has in place for other areas? And then cleaning and disinfecting. And so anyone in the museum who is hoping to do a program, and the way we defined that basically was anything outside of a typical exhibit component. So it includes our 2 drop-in spaces, which are our STEAM lab and our art lab. And it also included things like pop-up programs that might happen under the tent that's normally outside the museum in our outdoor area. We have an area called the Common that's just an open space that often hosts programs during normal times and during COVID times. So really anytime there would be a staff person who is helping visitors with a program that's outside of normal exhibit components. So far, it's gone really well. And I think, we're always trying to think of what are some of the good things that have come out of this. Certainly the ability to better understand some of the programs that other teams are pulling together. So, on that program review group, we have representatives from across teams. I think as educators, normally our first questions are, we want to ask questions about the educational goals and all of that, and we do, but we try and front load, okay, here's what, you know, now that we've seen so many proposals, when I was reading your proposal, here's what kind of pinged for me, we might want to talk about safety-wise. So that ability to talk across teams, I think, has been really good. The other thing is that I feel like many staff who, especially if they've done the program proposal for the first time, have indicated to us that it just made them feel more comfortable, that it didn't have to be on them as an individual to recognize all of the safety issues that might come up. And specifically, I would say one of the things that, you know, the cleaning piece usually is pretty straightforward. Either, like Maureen indicated, we're doing, you know, kind of a bleach bath room, and things from the program might end up in that bleach bath, which is the same with loose parts across the museum, or, you know, the same types of cleaning that we're doing for other exhibit components, spraying things down, letting the spray sit for a while, those things. But the physical distancing, I think, has been a challenge, but also kind of interesting. We've had a couple of programs dealing with some kind of issues that could be difficult when you're not able to just sit at a table and, you know, talk about something that's kind of tough with families. So thinking about how we can actually use the tables and furniture in a way that makes it, we're going to ensure there's 6 feet of distance, but it doesn't make it seem like I'm trying to back away from you. It kind of feels natural. So some things like that, I think, have been good for us to talk through, and have gone well when we've set up spaces in a very particular way. And then just making sure that the staff feel supported. You know, we're a children's museum, so you plan everything out, and then a kid comes up and hugs you at the end of the program. You know, I mean, that's kind of how it goes. And, you know, we have seen that several times, and you just roll with it. But as much as possible, you know, trying to use this proposal process to really flag any potential issues before staff get in a place that could be uncomfortable for them. So again, we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end, but I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer now to talk a little bit more about kind of our next section.
Thank you, Melissa and Maureen, for sharing that. Okay, so now we want to move into visitation, what it looked like before and after the pandemic. So as I mentioned, we've been collecting some data on this as well. This is also part of our ACM's fall 2020 COVID impact survey. And what we did is we asked museums to report their monthly attendance totals for 2020 and 2019. So what you're seeing here are percentiles of the percentage of 2020 attendance compared to 2019. So I am going to start with May, which is this third section in here. You can see that the blue bar graph is showing that 25% or less of museums were reporting 4% of their 2020 attendance their 2020 attendance was 4% compared to 2019. 50% or less were reporting 8%. And 75% or less were reporting 9%. Now, as you recall, that really was the first month that we saw museums physically reopen. I know that we are showing some figures for April. We had some museums that were reporting attendance for outdoor programs, so that was slightly different. June was the first, I'm sorry, 9% of, yes, I'm sorry, that was right. In June, we were seeing, so this was adding an additional layer of museums. This was our first big month of opening, at least on a global level. And here you can see that 75% or less of museums were reporting 25% of their 2020 attendance compared to 2019. And you're moving into July and August. You can see the 75% or less were reporting 15% of their attendance. And in August, it was 27% or less. Now, these months you had museums reporting who have, again, been opening since May. So you have some museums that potentially were opening some capacity for a few months. You had museums that were also just opening. The other thing I also wanted to share with you is we also asked, what is the maximum capacity that museums would be able to allow based on building capacity with the new COVID guidelines. We had 48 museums that were open who responded to the survey. So this is what this data is reflecting. And those museums on average were able to, their allowable capacity was 34%. So again, this was as of at the end of August, but you can see that very few museums were even hitting that mark. So that's just to contextualize the visitation that we were seeing as of August and from March to August. We also asked museums, again, it's the same 48 that were open, how are they receiving visitors? So what was the visitor experience? And so the blocks that you see here, those that are larger had a higher percentage of responses. So about 70% of museums were receiving visitors in some sort of reduced capacity visits. And about 65% were receiving visitors via time ticket visits, which I think is consistent with what Melissa and Maureen were talking about. They also shared some examples of how they were receiving visitors. So some were doing slightly less, some were doing birthdays and outdoor events. For the museums that did open in this summer, many of them started off with doing camps and receiving visitors that way. And seeing how that went. We also had some museums that decided in order to start off, they were just going to rent out their museums to families or small groups and doing that just a few days a week. This newer, the smallest block, however, it's a newer one. It's several museums responded that they have been opening up their museums to support schools or students in some capacity. So this ranged from creating spaces in their museums for pods of student pods that were schooling virtually. Some museums also partnered with their school systems and provided additional classroom space for their schools. So this is an area we're going to be keeping an eye on as museums really start thinking about innovative ways to partner as well as provide their spaces for their visitors.
Thanks, Jennifer. So for our perspective from Providence Children's Museum of being, we've been open 6 weeks now. I just want to definitely preface with, we're still figuring out, our visitor feedback. We still are, changing things based on the plans that we put, we devised in the summer, really seeing what works in practice. But what I want to talk about is, again, the difference in our operating hours, our attendance, and then I'll touch briefly on our programming, what we're up to, and Laura's going to talk more about that later. So we used to be open every single day. We're now open Thursday through Sunday for 2 time slots. We have those hour-and-a-half time slots, and as I mentioned, we're closed for half an hour in between for that loose parts exchanged. And our programming, we used to have drop-in programming, and we have a makerspace. Right now we have our education team is incredible. They've done a lot of the virtualization of programs that Laura will touch on later. And so our main program that's been happening at the museum are just a few special events that we've done so far since being reopened, and those have all been outside. So the picture that you see on the right there, that is an event that we put on in partnership with another local arts nonprofit. They helped us to create this experience where pods of families could come and create a collaborative mural. So they all had a canvas to work on in the parking lot, and they would switch and paint on each other's canvases. So it was we definitely have not done a lot of programming out in the parking lot, so that was a great pilot. The one other program that, again, Laura will touch on is a recent program we had in our children's garden space, where we had a performer that we are used to working with. We had him come in, and he is a bucket drummer. We had our families sit in pods outside in the garden. We had a limited number of people sign up for each of the times that he was doing the performance, and they got to drum with him. So those have been our 2 pilots so far for moving some special programming outside. And then just briefly, I'll touch on our 6 weeks of attendance so far. So we've been open 28 days since October 1st. Again, we have 100 spots to fill each day. And on average, we have about 60 people coming each day. And you can see the breakdown that we do have in admission. About 30% are our members. And I will just briefly say for our memberships, as most museums have done, we've extended their expiration dates to cover the months that we were closed. So that has made a lot of them very happy and lots of people interested in renewing because of it. And I'll hand it to Melissa. I know she's got lots to share.
So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we've been learning from our visitors in the few months that we've been reopened. One thing from the programmatic side that we were happy about to learn was that visitors actually are spending significant amount of time in programs when they can, and much like we were just saying with time ticketing, you know, it's a very different atmosphere now when we're open for 2.5-hour blocks in the morning and then in the afternoon. And we really weren't sure with that, you know, limited time frame. It's not like you can come back to the museum after lunch. Are people really going to want to spend any time doing programs? And what we found so far is that luckily, yes, they are really interested in sitting down and doing some intensive programs if we offer that. And our assumption there is that so for in the STEAM lab, for example, we only allow 2 visitor groups in that space, and there's quite a bit of space in there. And so you really are able to work in a very physically distanced way. And I think what we've heard from some of the early surveying that we did with families, even over the summer, was that even at that point, they were kind of online and zoomed out a little bit. So as long as we're giving them a project that's very hands-on and it's holding their children's attention, they're happy to stay for even, we've had people stay for up to an hour with some of the programs that we've done. So that could be a very significant part of their visit here at the museum. We have made a few changes. So here I'm showing not programs, but exhibit spaces. And particularly on the far right, we used to use that room for our Kiva blocks, and we've removed those from that space and set up our indoor sock skating rink and the floor is lava setup. And in part, that's because our climb that we have in the museum, our 3-story climb, we had to keep closed because we couldn't figure out how to clean that. If anybody has figured out a great way to clean their climbs, please let us know. But so in order to have more physical activity in the museum, we made some switches there. And for the most part, again, people are really happy with those swaps that we've made, and we see a lot of interest there. Much as Maureen has mentioned, we are doing a lot of surveying of our visitors, and I'm going to share some examples of what we're finding. Not at all, you know, I think it's just interesting more to see the kinds of questions that we're asking, and again would be very curious about how others are approaching this with their visitors. But we have luckily gotten a really good response rate. So 90% of people who open the survey do complete it, and I was only pulling from our August and September data here, but we had over 500 responses at that point, and we continue to see a lot of interest in completing that survey, which is wonderful. About 30% of the people responding to our surveys are members. So that's also kind of interesting for us to know that we're getting a significant number of visitors who are not museum members. So, you know, baseline, I think for all of us, we want to make sure that kids and families are still enjoying the experience here. And luckily, we're getting a good response there. I did just look at the October data this morning, and it's pretty consistent. Although the numbers of people visiting the museum have dipped a little bit with school starting and other things going on, but we're luckily seeing that children are still seeming to enjoy their time here, which is wonderful. We can go on to the next one. We asked a few different types of questions about the new safety things that we had implemented to make sure visitors were noticing them, honestly. And so the capacity limit signs was one thing we wanted to ask about. We are seeing that luckily people are noticing that. We asked similar questions. I don't think I included them, but we asked similar questions about, if they were able to find hand sanitizer if they needed it and see the wipes and things like that, which is great. We can go on to the next one. Great. able to socially distance. That I know someone had asked a pre-question of us, and of course that's a really difficult thing to do with kids who just want to play with each other. This we still struggle with for sure, as we're having staff out in exhibits and on the floor, knowing exactly when to kind of step in and how that should work. But we continue to try and figure out ways to make it a little bit better. We do, Maureen, maybe you're doing this as well. Now, not when we first opened in July, it honestly didn't even occur to us, but now when we're greeting people at admissions, we do have more of a kind of a standard spiel that we give, and the socially, physically distanced piece is in that. So hopefully, the reminders at the beginning of the visit help a little bit, but that is still one area that we're, struggling with, depending on how busy the museum is on a given day. Speaking of admissions process, so another thing that has worked really well when we open our doors for our morning or afternoon session is to actually meet people outside. So even before they come in the building, someone is kind of setting the stage for them so they'll know exactly what to expect in the process. And so far that has seemed to also work really well in making people feel comfortable during the admissions process. And that was the last one. Continuing to gather a lot of data, and I think this probably goes without saying, but somehow it makes me feel better to say that we know we're never going to please everyone, and we still, I think luckily what we're finding, especially when we're asking people to rate on a Likert scale, is that they're pretty happy with the experience and things are going well. We get a lot of negative or what feels like to us a lot of negative comments, a lot of positive ones too, and we continue to try and sort through them and figure out how we can, change things to keep up with the good stuff.
And if I could, I want to just piggyback on that, in that, the surveying, of course, was also done pre-opening, correct? Like to determine for both of you. And of course, this was done to determine if people would be comfortable coming into these spaces, how they would be comfortable. And I think that really guided a lot of children's museums in terms of their planning and things like that. So very instrumental, and thank you for sharing. Okay, so now we're going to move into our third and final topic, the virtualization of exhibits and programs. So this information that I have here is actually information that we took from our first survey that we did in May, so May 2020. And in terms of online activities, we saw children's museums at least pivot to this format almost immediately. So much so that on the bottom right-hand portion of your screen, you can see Find a Children's Museum. That's ACM's public-facing site. We actually created a sub-page called Children's Museums at Home, which started cataloging all of the online programs that children's museums were doing because there was such an ask and request for it. The list on the left that you can see starting with STEAM, these are all the different types of programming that we were able to identify. And we also, this was also included in our survey, and museums responded that the top two programs or content area programs that museums were providing was around STEAM and arts and crafts. The third, like probably about just under 50% of museums were reporting, I put it under literacy, but it was really virtual story times. That's what they were doing a lot of, and they still are. I think the digital or the online arena has shifted slightly. I think both of you mentioned that there is a level of fatigue, particularly for students that are also doing virtual schooling. So I think that's something we could probably talk about in a little bit. We also asked which are the platforms that museums were using, and 93% of museums at this time reported doing some sort of online activity. 100% of those museums were using their websites to disseminate information about that. But I would say probably about 93% were using Facebook. That was one of the most predominant platforms in order to convey these activities. Second most was Twitter and Instagram, and then there were about 40% using YouTube. So again, This is information that is available to you. The link I have at the bottom is the report from the first survey that actually kind of describes a little bit more of some of this information. So I will pass it to Maureen, I believe. Or Laura.
I think that one's me. So, yeah, we'll get it eventually. So we, like everyone else, we pivoted to online programming as soon as the museum closed, and learned a lot during that time. The Boston Children's Museum hadn't done a ton of online programming prior to having to close for the pandemic. And I'll just give, kind of an overview of some of what we have learned. We have shifted a little bit away from it now, in part because the museum is reopened and we just really need to focus a lot of efforts here and with other projects that we have going on, but also because of the kind of Zoom fatigue that we're hearing from our visitors. We do have one live recurring feature that's been very popular, that is Creature Feature with Oliver, our ball python, who is a star. And that's almost every Saturday. He and Alyssa, who is pictured here, they do a live feature on Facebook. So that continues to be pretty popular. And we'll keep doing that for the foreseeable future. Like many groups, we did a bunch of online activities that incorporated both kind of a written activity sheet and a video, and that's what you see in the lower right corner. Psychedelic Milk, that was our most popular activity online, and I think it had many, many thousands of viewers for that video. Got a lot of play, which was interesting. And we still do a little bit of this, just pared back. We were putting out multiple activities and videos per day when the museum was truly closed. Now it's, a few a week, and also drawing from our partners and trying to promote some of what they might be doing as well. One thing that isn't pictured here, but I think it's kind of an interesting way to think about the role of virtual exhibits and programs. We have heard from a few groups that were interested in having us create things that they would pay for, which was great for us. So we did, for example, work with a charter school network that was trying to do some innovative stuff for their after school programming. And we ended up creating kind of a 5-hour-long sessions of like a live variety show kind of thing that was shown to their kids on Friday afternoons. We did some programming and video creation for a corporate partner of ours who was looking to support their employees with who have kids at home over the summer, knowing that they probably couldn't send their kids to summer camps in the area. So some of that also, is less publicly visible, but I think has been a really good learning experience for us, and always great when there's some monetization that can occur with some of this virtual programming. I also wanted to highlight, we do have a wonderful collections team here at the museum, and they have an awesome, if I can say, Instagram account that features a character named Hans, who actually you can see in the middle panel there. He's the little doll right at the bottom there. And he just kind of goes around the museum and shares what's going on in collections. He made some appearances in that virtual after school program that I mentioned. So he got to know some kids as he was sharing more about the museum. And I think it's a little bit unexpected. I think it almost has more of an adult voice, or maybe like kind of what I think of from the Muppets, where adults think it's fun, or at least I think it's funny. And kids probably also were like, oh, that's, he's taking us around and he has his own personality, which is kind of fun to see. And then just in the next slide, I think you'll see that Hans gets to meet lots of very cool characters, which is another cool thing. So that has been an interesting way for us to also share what's going on behind the scenes here. And now I'll pass it over to Maureen.
I'm going to actually jump in here, Melissa. Just as a member of the education team, I'm going to speak a little bit about how we've dealt with the shift to virtualization. And so this here is actually our exhibits, and where we have drawn inspiration and tried to translate that into at-home activities. So we're pulling inspiration from our exhibits, but really hoping that parents and kids at home will create the environment of the museum in their own space. And so you can see in the top photo on the left there, that's our museum ramp. It's decorated with colorful window dressing, kind of cellophane stickers. And again, we were hoping to bring that into our family's home to encourage them to do that. So bringing a little bit of the museum into the home space. Same with the photos you see on the right. Our exhibits team actually brought together these loose parts, exhibit components, which they created videos for to encourage families to, again, make things that they'll see and they'll do at the museum, but at home. And so, yeah, I think, Maureen, I'll move on to the next slide. Thanks. And so really what I wanted to share with you is our virtualization of programs. So of course, we've moved to more usual things that many other museums have done, like live streaming events and our Zoom calls and that kind of thing. So this main picture here is the program that Maureen was speaking of just a few minutes ago about our rhythm room drumming theme, and this was all live streamed. So we had real-time attendees. We had attendees who were actually physically there, but we also had some virtual. But I really wanted to talk about how we had to think a little bit more outside the box on how we would reach some of our audience when we couldn't actually welcome them to the museum physically. And so we had to partner with our community much more, I think, than we have done in the past, which I think is a great positive thing. But it helped us kind of alleviate some of the stress on our staff and our budget by just asking volunteers to help us out in programming. So we had a reading challenge, Fiction Friday. That's something that's continuing, where we have guest readers come and share a story. So that helps take the kind of pressure off of us a little bit, if I'm being honest. And then also we offered, we started working with Rhode Island Department of Education much more so than we have before, by offering classes, Zoom classes, yes, but they were a little bit different in the way that it was a week long over the summer, and we marketed them, of course, as like a fun, hands-on program that met only 2 to 3 times a week on Zoom, and then the rest was independent working sessions. And we found that to be very successful in the way that the kids could come for an hour on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then any other work that they were doing was on their own and actually really involved the whole family. I think that was another unique part, is our museum educator communicated extremely efficiently with the families and kept them updated on the status of where the kids were and that kind of thing. So though it wasn't intended to be a family program, I do think it actually eventually turned into one. And so those were a huge success. We did design challenges. So we also used found objects at the home, which was intentional in the way that it speaks to the museum's values, but it also didn't require us to make a kit, a take-home kit. So we used things like paper, tape, paper clips, anything that you could just pick up around the home, and that's what our design challenges were designed around. And then I'm just going to mention this very quickly because I do want to give us a good 10 minutes to answer some questions, but we've just started to embark on virtual field trips, which might be of interest to some of you. They are with our local Head Start classrooms, and though we have not done them and I can't speak to their success, we are currently planning how to best do that, and I did want to share some of our brainstorming with you. What we're thinking for virtual field trips, we will include some sort of introduction video to the museum. So it will feature a museum educator who is introducing some of the exhibits specifically related to the theme of the field trip. So for example, shapes, colors, and patterns. They might show the ramp that you saw in the previous slide. And then we also plan on sending a museum box kit. So this is where a kit comes in, which will include materials, a book about the museum, which will be written by museum educators, extension activities, things of that nature. And then we also plan on doing an intro packet for teachers, which will introduce teachers to the vocabulary we plan on using, lesson plans, and very explicit connections to standards, as well as an intro video for the teacher to explain the lessons that are being led, what to expect basically in this virtual field trip, and then finally the staff that will virtualize themselves into the classroom. So we hope that will be successful, and I think it's going to be obviously a learning process, just like everything that we've talked about today, and much like I'm sure you are also all embarking on. So that's really all I have to share about programming, but I do want to turn to discussion questions, which I have been monitoring as you have been submitting them here through the Q&A, so I appreciate that. I think what I'm going to start with is, it looks like a few people are very interested in, well, we do have, actually, I'll go with the one that has the most likes right now. And it says, do you have any suggestions for ways to approach take home or even mail home hands-on learning kits? So again, thinking about kits. And Melissa, I know you have some insight into this.
Yeah, we did do some pilot testing of take-home kits over the summer, and we created 4 different versions. 3 of them were a specific activity, open-ended activity, but intended to be done to create a certain project or design challenge, and they were for different age ranges. And then we had one that was even more open-ended that we called the creative box, that was just a bunch of really fun craft materials and included 12 different engineering challenges, or a couple of them weren't engineering, a lot of them were. And we got really good feedback, and we've repurposed them in several different ways, but ultimately when we ran the numbers, we didn't feel like we would be able to create them and make enough money back if we were selling them. And comparing across other types of subscription boxes and asking families what they would be willing to pay for it, we ultimately decided that it wasn't the best use of our time to create those kits for sale. We have since used them, because we got such good feedback on them, for a variety of different projects. When it was STEM Week here in Massachusetts, we made, oh God, I don't know. We made it felt like a million. I think we made several hundred of them to send to Boston Public Schools. We had some sponsorship funding to do things like that. So they still are getting put to good use, but when all was said and done, we just felt like we had other things that we would be perhaps higher benefit for us. So I know that's not a direct answer to the question, but when we ran the numbers, that's where we came out at Boston Children's Museum.
I think I can also just tack on to that. Maureen had reminded me that earlier in the summer, we had also, again, with our partnerships, we partnered with the Providence Public Library, and they were in charge of the kits, but we helped assemble them and give our expertise in that kind of way. And so it was nice because they were also kind of in charge of distributing them. So we found a partner, we gave our little 10 cents, and then they were able to kind of get it out into the community. So that might be a successful way, is finding a partner.
Yeah, and I want to jump in here just on, again, a national level. We have seen these activity kits as being incredibly popular, particularly if there is a partner or a funder that would be interested in this. A lot of museums, and like Providence, Chicago Children's Museum also partnered with the Chicago Public Library. They were also able to get funding because library is an accessible distribution center, and there's not a fee barrier there. So there are some examples out there too of other museums that have been doing this, and they have also been well received. And I believe they are also targeting at-risk populations as well, who can't necessarily get online even for school on a regular basis. So yeah.
And I will move on to the next kind of overarching question or theme, I think, is I'll try to kind of thread a few questions together into one, but we have somebody asking about like how we promote this sense of discovery or shared learning in such a constrained environment, such as physical visitation, but also I'm going to try to loop in somebody else's question and think about the sense of discovery and shared learning that you also can try to promote in a Zoom session, and what beyond like the visual sense, how can you kind of encompass hands-on learning in such constrained spaces, I guess, or elements.
I'm happy to chime in first for specifically like the in-person at the museum. So, we, as we said, when we start, we welcome everyone. Of course, we're telling them the rules and all that, but really, first and foremost, we're telling them how glad we are that they're here. The kids are so excited. We're reciprocating that energy. And our play educators that are on the museum floor, they have received the same training that they always do, really focusing on the importance of play. And though they are, of course, doing that cleaning, doing those extra things, they're still really focusing on creating that positive experience for the children and families. So we still see them, at a 6-foot distance, building together with the blocks, or asking great open-ended questions. And so we're of course, trying our best to encourage the mask use and all those things, but we are holding tight to all the things that are so important to us, and continuing to really emphasize free play and engage with families as much as we can, even though we are standing a little bit farther apart. Yeah.
Thank you, Maureen. Maureen, I was wondering maybe if you just want to switch the slide to the last screen, just so that people can see our names and our emails as we kind of finish up here, and they can jot that down if they want. If we didn't answer any question that they wanted us to, we have lots of insight to share, so please email us. I am wondering here if we might talk about any visitor issues. Have we seen any issues of these new protocols in place, and how do we deal with them?
Sure. So I think we have all been pleasantly surprised that we haven't seen as many issues as we thought we might. So that's a good thing. I would say in-person issues have normally been around mask wearing, and usually it's the adults, not the kids. And again, that's pretty rare. That's why we remember them, when they come up. What we do hear more about the social distancing or physical distancing issues through the visitor survey. I don't know that we've actually had any complaints from visitors in person about that, but sometimes in the visitor survey, we'll get comments that they wish that staff had done more to enforce that. But for the most part, we really haven't run into as many issues as we thought we would.
And I'm going to quickly, I'm sorry, Maureen, were you going to say something?
Just a few quick things.
Yeah.
One, when we run into, whether it's masks or whatever protocol, we have started to kind of just reframe our language. And, if we have a visitor come up and their mask just doesn't fit them right, we have child size and adult size masks. And we say, oh, I know masks can be so tricky. Here's a new one. This will help fit you a little bit better. So we're really just reframing the situations. And rather than saying, hey, why isn't your mask fitting? Like, let me help you. And so that has really helped. And we also make announcements with a very cheery voice to talk about masks and distancing, and ask if anyone needs a replacement mask. So being proactive and really reframing the language and coming from a supportive lens, that has really helped us.
Thanks, Maureen. That was actually a perfect segue into the last question. When we were meeting to discuss this session, Melissa so kindly brought up that they've started to shift their mentality about this whole situation, and I think that's something that we've all kind of had to move forward in doing. So I just want to end the session on a positive note with a positive question, and I'm wondering, what's the best thing that you have seen come out of these times for our hands-on visitors?
Since I posed the initial question, I think for our staff and internally at the museum, the best thing that has come out of this is that we really have broken down a lot of the silos that existed for no good reason at all, other than it's how we had done things for a really long time. And I can name more projects this year that multiple teams worked on and brought to fruition than I could from years past. So that's awesome. And then I think the other great thing for both visitors and staff is that our capacity is so limited as compared to what it would be during normal times that I think several of us have had some really great interactions with families, which we've had, you know, it would happen in normal times as well, but that was really refreshing. And to be able to, you know, have a family in a certain space that you're in for a long period of time and interact with them and see that it's still, you know, it is still possible to have joyful discovery and hands-on stuff during this time has been really wonderful.
Yeah, I wish mine were a little bit different, but honestly, Melissa, I second that. We have had some really lovely conversations with visitors because the sample size is much smaller. We always knew our repeat members, but now we actually have people coming regularly every single week, the same time slot. And so we know, you know, they'll say, we'll see you next Friday. We have one person, we actually have a decent amount of people who say that they have just moved, well, they moved here during the pandemic or right before. And so they are just so excited to be discovering this space now. And, you know, we're welcoming them in. So yeah, those repeat visitors. And one other different element is because we have limited hours now and we're opening just a little bit later by 30 minutes, we have added in a morning meeting for our frontline staff. We always had different channels and ways of communicating, but that has been incredibly helpful. We can talk about the day. If there is that special program in the garden, we can talk about our numbers for the day, answer questions. And I know some museums already had that just wasn't something we had built into our schedule before. So that really has been helpful for us.
And I know we're over time, but I just want to jump in from stories I've heard similar to what Melissa and Maureen are saying, that children's museums are really, this time has really forced them to think how they can use their spaces in different ways, maybe unexpected ways. And we're seeing that both Melissa and Maureen have given examples of that. We're also seeing museums that are creating, you know, food distribution sites. They're transitioning their space into daycare centers for frontline workers, really reaching out and supporting their communities in ways because they know their spaces are safe spaces and also allow for the important social emotional learning that in some cases is not happening, particularly in the littles, you know, the 0 to 3s. And that really is the motivation, I think, for a lot of us that do provide spaces, hands-on spaces for children and families, that's why they feel it's such an essential piece of their community. So I just wanted to say that.
Well, thank you all for being here. I'm so glad we got to chat about this. Again, if you have questions still, please feel free to email us. It's been awesome chatting about hands-on exploring and knowing that it's still possible in such a tricky time. And so thank you all.
Thank you.